Hello and welcome to the Software Engineering Unlocked podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michaela, and today I have the pleasure to talk to Barak Brudo. But before I start, let me tell you about my latest project, awesomecodreviews.com. Yeah, all my work in code reviews has now its own dedicated home. At awesomecodreviews.com, you will find articles about code review best practices, code review checklists, news about the latest research on code reviews, and of course, workshops and courses I offer around this topic. So hop over to awesomecodreviews.com and check out my latest work. But now back to Barak. Barak helps organizations secure the software supply chain. He works as a developer relation advocate at Scribe Security and will tell us today all about why we should care about acronyms such as EO 14028, SSDF, and SBOM. So, welcome to the show, Barak. I'm so curious what this all means.
Well, acronyms are very common in the land of cyber and high tech in general. They're just because there's so many words that it makes much more sense to shorten them into acronyms than to say the whole thing over and over and over again. There are actually so many acronyms that you could get confused because some of them just mean different things depending on the context. But for this conversation, all of these acronyms are centered around one main thing, which is the software supply chain. The software supply chain represents essentially all the bits of software that end up in your software, your code, whatever. Because you see, these days, almost nobody writes a piece of software completely from scratch. It's hardly ever done because there's so many building blocks already available in the open source. But if you follow the same train of logic to its source, you see that if you use building blocks that are written by other people, then those building blocks also use building blocks written by other people, and so on and so forth. It could go on for a very long time. So if you end up using some of these building blocks, you really don't have a very clear notion of everything that is included in your final product. That means that you have a higher chance of including something that might be bad for you. Just like if you're allergic to, for example, olives, and you eat something, but suddenly, oops, you're not feeling well, maybe there was a trace of olives in there and you just didn't know. So the whole point of these various acronyms is to help us, or help the industry at large, figure out what's in your code, what's in everybody's code, so that everybody can know where or what everything is. That transparency should help everybody be more secure, more safe. At least they'll be informed, which is the first step. So we started with EO 14028. That's the number of the executive order from the Biden administration in the United States. It came out in May of 2021, following the very massive, very famous public hack of SolarWinds in the late 2020. The executive order is very long, very comprehensive. Section 4 of that executive order speaks specifically about the securing the software supply chain. It numbers various ideas, various strategies. Among other things, it charges NIST, which is the National Infrastructure Organization, there to write a framework for securing the software supply chain. It also mentions the SBOM, the SBOM, by name specifically. The SBOM is the Software Bill of Materials. Just like any bill of materials or a list of components, it does exactly that. It's a list of components for your software. Because it is supposed to be, at least in theory, comprehensive, it doesn't only tell you you have fragment or library A, it tells you everything in your software, even things you didn't know you had. So instead of just saying this is library A, it tells you this is library A and it relies on library B, C, and D, and those libraries rely on those, and these are the connections between them. This is everything in your software.
So it's like a dependency graph of my software.
It's more than a dependency graph because dependency is only one of the types of relationship that you can find between different libraries, but it is the most common. But there are other types of relationships that you can describe. For example, this file was created as a result of a test on this file. These two files joined together, then were deleted in the compiling process, creating this file instead. The description of the standard for SBOM describes, I think, over 43 different types of relationships. I don't remember them all, but yes, dependencies is the most common. And again, you can describe dependencies in a graph, which is very helpful, but an SBOM is so much more because has other uses. For example, each of these open source libraries has their own license. Some of these licenses, there are many different types of licenses. Some of these licenses say that if you include that library in your product, it has to be open source. You can't use it if you're using it for something that is proprietary. If you don't follow the chain of let's call it chain of dependency all the way through, you might inadvertently include such a piece of license in your software, and suddenly your IP is meaningless. Everything you do becomes open source. It's
Oh,
called
wow.
it's called license poisoning,
Okay.
and a lot of people that are, let's call it legally minded, spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that everything that is included in enterprise software does not inadvertently somewhere include one of these licenses. That's just one of the uses that you can use an SBOM for. Some
Hmm.
other examples is once you have a full list of everything in your software, a full list makes it a lot easier, first of all, to search for vulnerabilities, to search for exploits. It also enables you to take the whole list, plug it into a database of vulnerabilities, and get back a full list of everything that might be a problem, including where it is in your software. You need to remember that software is a very, very dynamic thing. It also gets old very, very quickly. So if you have a legacy system that the people who wrote or developed are no longer with you, might be on old servers, having an SBOM for those systems make it so much easier to suddenly tackle known and very, very rapidly becoming a problem new vulnerability. For example, the Log4j instance late last year in December was a huge problem, still is for a lot of companies, mainly because they weren't sure if they had that particular problematic version. And even if they did, where exactly was it? Remember that a certain piece of software or library could be included numerous times in various places, locations. The fact that you possibly may have found it once doesn't mean that you're now free and clear. So having an SBOM that tells you exactly where everything is, including the relative path of various libraries, including the exact version, including the exact license, it tells you basically everything you need to know about your software. Very handy.
Okay, so you made a lot of arguments for such a SBOM thing, right? So we need
Yeah.
it because obviously we are depending on third-party libraries, and we don't know where it is. So now, when I think about a list of all the software that I'm using, first of all, as you said, it's dynamic, so it's changing a lot. Then, first of all,
Mhm.
creating it will be definitely quite tedious. So how am I going to work with such a SBOM? Is it something that's extracted from my software and then updated automatically, or do I have to write that by hand? How does it work?
Well, the reason that the executive order and the SSDF and other, let's call it people of conscience are saying to use it is that it's not the responsibility of the user to produce this list of components. It's actually the responsibility of the producer. So the idea is that everybody who produces software will include in their pipeline a little piece of software that produces an SBOM. Obviously, the SBOM needs to be recreated every time you recompile your software.
Hmm.
Now, if you're using third-party software, then you need to request an SBOM with that piece of software too. The thing is that, like you said, some people already recognize the importance of SBOM and they wanted to run the program that creates it themselves on their own software. But some people, let's call them very, very zealous for their IP rights, are worried that if you break open their software to look what's inside, to see what's under the hood, you may discover some things that they don't want you to see. For example, that they're using very old libraries, unpatched, unmitigated with even though they have known vulnerabilities, just because a lot of people value the concept of if it's not broken, don't fix it. And it saves time on development and saves time to go to market. So
Well, it's
they're
yeah.
actually, yeah, they're
It
actually rules. I don't know if they're fully legal now, but there are rules, just like the old rule of don't remove the tag from a mattress or don't open a laptop yourself because you void the warranty. There are rules that if you run an SBOM creating software on a closed piece of software, you're basically voiding the warranty or doing some other very, very bad thing. So the idea is for the software producers to create the SBOM and supply it with their piece of software, so that you're not only getting a black box that you have no idea what's in it, you're getting the black box and you're getting the full list of everything in it,
The
So
ingredients.
if you have a problem, if you're allergic to a certain library, a certain ingredient in that software, you now have the ability to look at the list and see that you don't really want to use it.
Well,
You might,
yeah.
yeah.
But as you said, I mean, now let's think about, okay, it's a very nice idea, right? And, but as you said, some companies, and I think quite a large majority of their companies, they have real problems with it. And this is not just they're not making things up, right? It's not, they cannot, similar to J Log4j, right? You cannot just go and say, oh, I'm spending a day and I'm, now removing the dependencies. It's a lot of work, which sometimes is just not possible. So if I would show that I'm using those old unpatched versions of something, I cannot change it from one day to another. And if I would expose that, I mean, it's not that I'm secure because not of exposing it, but I'm definitely more unsecure if I'm exposing, that I'm relying on those. Like it's open to every hacker, in the world that wants to destroy me. So I'm not going to
Well,
release it. I would not release it. I would say yes. Nice
fair enough.
idea, but
Yeah, yeah. It's just that you're thinking of it from the point of view of the producers, which is
hmm,
fair enough. A lot of people
yeah.
would, but you need to think of it from the point of view of the users. Let's say that we're talking about a critical piece of software and a critical piece of hardware. Let's
I
go
think
with
I think
something
that
really
most
important.
critical pieces of software rely on the most crappiest pieces of software.
Well, like
That's
which is why I
my
said I want to take a really, really like extreme example: a
yeah.
pacemaker or an
Yeah.
insulin pump.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You really don't want the software in there to be vulnerable. When you include an SBOM, you're
True.
basically giving the consumer the power of choice. You can say, okay, look, I may be using legacy code, I may be using old libraries, but as sort of not really compensation, but the trade-off is you can get the software faster and it's a lot cheaper. But the consumer can say, okay, yes, it is cheaper and it is faster, but I know about these 15 vulnerabilities that might mean that somebody who doesn't like me would now stop my insulin or stop my heart. And I think the trade off of paying a bit more is worth it. Giving the consumers the power to make that decision knowingly, I think, is better. And also, if that SBOM is now open to review, the consumer can't say, sorry, the producer can't say, but I didn't know. Nobody told me. I didn't do the checks. I did my due diligence. If something bad happens, now they are liable. And liability is very important because that's the sort of world we live in these days with massive hacks, software supply chain attacks, and hackers from nations even who do bad things just to disrupt their so-called enemies and then people who are out there just to make a profit. If the producers of software are not held responsible for whatever it is they're producing, nobody is. And people
I
would just
yeah.
keep on, yeah.
I totally agree with you. I'm totally on board with you. I'm just talking from a practical perspective,
Mhm.
how are we getting there? Because
Ah.
I remember back when the pandemic started, there was this oh, I probably it's good that I can't remember the name of the company, but they advertised for the ventilators, right? And they said
Mhm.
something like, "Oh, our ventilators are with 8 million lines of code," and everybody was like, "Oh my god!" Like the software industry was, "Oh my god, this is the worst advertisement you can do," right? Like
Mhm.
it's the more lines you have, the worse it actually is, right? So I would argue that pacemakers or hearing aids or ventilators, a lot of software in the hospital, maybe banking, we don't want to know really what's inside, right? So how can we come from a state that we are right now where we say, well, running such a software and getting an SBOM for my software is probably a real bomb. I don't want to release it, I don't want to show it to the world, to something where we can actually do it.
Well, this is where I think that the US did something right for once. The executive order, instead of making this a regulation with audits and codifying it into law, they went in a slightly different route. What the executive order says is that if you don't follow these new rules, we just won't buy from you. We
Mm.
won't do business with companies who are not proven to follow the new regulations or let's call it best practices because they're not actually regulations, the new best practices for securing supply chain and the other, that's just section 4, but and all the other sections, all the other requirements and suggestions that we made to software security or cybersecurity more important. Now you might think, okay, how many companies could possibly be selling to the US government? Can't be that many, right? I mean, we're talking about military suppliers and then really like car suppliers, but they can't be that many. But here's the beautiful thing. If we go back to what I said at the beginning about companies who use pieces of software being written by other people, also that's true for hardware. So a lot of those people who sell to the US government are just aggregators. They're just taking bits of hardware and software and putting them together. And if they need to be liable to the US government and prove that they're following these new best practices, that is not their responsibility solely because they're going to roll it down. They're going to require all their suppliers to follow the same regulations so that they can prove it, because otherwise, it's nothing there. And if those suppliers, which are obviously, again, aggregators themselves, need to be held accountable, they're going to roll it down and roll it down and roll it down. And eventually, this goes everywhere because this involves money and contracts with the US government, which are extremely lucrative. I think it has a better chance of following through, of making these, let's call them changes or requirements, a thing of reality than had they said this is just a new regulation. I can tell you, because I'm following the subject, that as of March this year, the OMB, which is sort of like the US administration for purchasing things, already issued a statement or an instruction for all the US departments that are relevant to start following the SSDF. I didn't mention the SSDF so far. The SSDF is the Secure Software Development Framework. Like I said, making it an acronym is so much easier than saying the whole thing over and over again. It was written based on the requirement of the executive order, and it's not that long. It's about 30 pages, but it does give a very comprehensive list of best practice ideas and suggestions, so that no matter what your business is, if you follow all these suggestions, your software will be more secure, which is the object here.
Yeah.
And another very nice thing they did was, we are not going to start checking you. We're going to take your word. If you tell us that you are secure, that you follow the SSDF, that you have the evidence, we're going to believe you until something happens. And then we're going to ask to see the evidence. And if you don't have it, then you've been lying to the US government. And there are punishments for that. You can't just go around lying to the US government. So I think most people, if they want to do business with the US government or business with companies who do business and so on and so forth down the chain, they're going to start to have to rely and generate these types of evidence, and we'll all be better for it.
Yeah. So the SBOM is probably only one thing. What about code reviews?
Yes.
Does it mention code reviews somewhere in
Definitely.
there? And what does
Yeah,
it say?
it does. Code review is essentially one of the, very, very strong suggestions in the SSDF, because we don't want programmers to just push changes through without anybody looking at them over. Sometimes a code review is being done automatically, but the SSDF recommends that at least two people would, or at least two, I wouldn't necessarily say people, two eyeballs or two sources would look at code before it's being pushed through. So one of these could be an automated test, but the other should be a human person. Just like code review, for example, 2FA is also mentioned. Automatic testing on the pipeline is mentioned. Having people in charge of thinking about security from the minute you're designing a product and up until the moment it's no longer viable and you need to inform people. Having a plan in place to what to do if something bad does happen. Who do you tell? How do you inform people? When do you inform people? All very important. A couple of really bad examples. There's a lot of companies who are being hacked left and right everywhere. Some of the news that are coming out of it are more than 6 months later. You get a piece of news that 6 months ago, this and this company was hacked and consumer information was stolen and then used. And they only inform everybody 6 months later. What good does that do? Everybody who could have used that information already did. If your identity was going to be stolen, it already was. Your social security number, your credit card number, assuming it was part of the information, is already out there for 6 months. So knowing 6 months later doesn't going to help anybody.
So and also, did he give a concrete timeline when you have to inform everybody? or is it
That's
very
not.
vague? Normally, all these things are very
Yeah,
vague, always.
the SSDF is the SSDF is vague on purpose because it's trying to be true for everybody.
Hmm.
But I think CISA has recently, I think last week, has is starting to work on a new time frame. I think that between 24 and 48 hours to inform everybody is what is currently suggested. We have to remember that if you were affected by some sort of hack or ransomware or something, the faster you inform other people, the easier it would be for those people to create a defense or be prepared or not fall for the same trick. If you wait 6 months just because you want to look good for your shareholders, you're basically just perpetuating the same problem, and the bad guys just have an easier time doing the same trick over and over for everybody.
Yeah, but you also need time to fix it, right? Like if it's
Yeah.
a real vulnerability, you need time to fix it. And I think 48 hours is very
You don't, no,
unrealistic.
no, you don't have to fix it immediately, but you need to inform. And again, you don't necessarily have to inform the public in 24 or 48 hours, but you do
Hmm.
need to inform, let's call it the relevant groups. CISA, for example, is not just saying, tell us and we'll do nothing about it. Tell us and we might be able to help you. Let's all share the information, even if you don't tell the public, because sometimes the public has a right to know. But even if you don't, at least tell us. We have more resources. You're not alone in this. We all want to make ransomware and hacking more problematic for the people who practice it, less profitable. And we can all share resources of this. This is a national interest, especially if the hack that you think is nothing, just to steal some, I don't know, some user emails, might be from a nation state, might be somewhere down the line a matter of national security. You might not have all the information. So share with us. We have more resources. We can call on additional help. We can all work together to make not just your hack, but everybody's hacking less profitable, less, more time consuming, more problematic. It's a new idea that might be familiar to some people. It's called cooperation and working together. I really appreciate the new head of CISA, who's really working hard on creating the connections with the right communities. She recently visited the Black Hat conference and spoke on stage. She said that humility is very important. She's not there to tell them what to do, but she is there to request that they work together, the request that they cooperate, that they share information. Because again, the more they cooperate, CISA hackers, the civilian market companies, the more all of them work together, the harder it will be for the bad guys to succeed.
Yeah, that's true. I totally agree. And maybe you can tell me, but if I would be in, let's say, maybe an unexperienced CEO or CTO, right? And something
Mhm.
happens, like you're probably completely freaked out, and then reaching out to other people. And in a capitalistic world, I can't
Mhm.
imagine that somebody is helping us for free, right? So if you're telling me that
Yeah.
a lot of organizations that seem very impressive will now start to do things, I see our ship sinking much faster than if I would just shut up my mouth, which obviously is not, not what I recommend, but I'm just talking about how you might feel, right? You might feel intimidated
Yeah.
that such a large
Mhm.
organization somehow now looks on your fingers, maybe wants some, consultancy fees that you can't pay and
Yeah.
so on, right? I don't know. What's going to
There,
happen? Is
there
it all
are,
for free? Do we get for free
yeah.
help or?
It is for free. Congress has approved a gigantic budget for this. The White House even has a ready room for taking care of hacking, as far as I remember. And the White House, I think earlier this year, even had a special conference day for helping secure open source. The Google, Microsoft pledging millions of dollars, working with very well-known bodies like the Linux Fund to, I think that the project is called the Alpha Omega Project, working to
Mhm.
secure open source projects. Because again, open source projects could be maintained by a single person. And if that package is extremely useful, well-known, well-downloaded, and suddenly it has a vulnerability, there's nothing you can do about it. So the idea is to secure the open source packages at their source to help the maintainers and the people who work on this to be more secure, both in the development and in the final packaging of those libraries. And millions of dollars are going into this, so that whatever it is you end up using, if it's popular enough, they can't do everything, but they're starting somewhere. And if those packages are popular enough and merit the intervention of the Alpha Omega projects, you will get to know that. And they actually published a call for both people and companies who want to help. They have meetings. It's all very transparent. I highly recommend that if our listeners are interested, they should go and look it up, the Alpha Omega Project. It's an interesting project for securing open source. And again, the idea is that because these problems are not unique to a single company or even a single sector, they're everywhere. If people don't work together, they just make it easier for the bad guys to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I recall when there was the Log4j thing, and then people shitting all over the open source maintainers, while large organization making millions and are using that software without ever contributing back, right? So yeah, I definitely see how that can work. But you were only mentioning open source. What if I'm the CTO of not an open source thing? Because probably if I'm a CTO, I'm not an open source thing. So I have some that I'm selling, and we are running into troubles, having some vulnerabilities. Can we also expect some help?
Yeah. You can at least inform, even if you don't request the help, which you don't have to. It's your software, it's your company, but you should at least inform CISA of what happened so that they can add it to their database. Especially because some of these are not merely technical issues; they're relying more and more on human engineering, and the more those are being published and known, the harder it is to use. I've recently read about a technique which was used to penetrate Cisco, which is, a security company. The technique is very simple. It's called 2FA fatigue. The bad guys are basically finding somebody who they think is susceptible, and they keep sending them messages of 2FA authentication over and over again via email, via phone. They just bombard them with messages. Please authorize the 2FA. You need to authorize it. You need to authorize it. There's a problem. Some unknown has used. We need you to authorize. We need you to authorize. Eventually, from sheer fatigue, they just click it and authorize it because they're tired. And at that moment, they gain access.
Yeah.
They bypass the 2FA because they just got the authorization from the person who's holding the code, and they get in.
Yeah.
They only need a single person in your organization to fall for this, and they're now in your network. They can escalate the permissions and do whatever it is bad guys do when they're in your network, which is usually some stuff that you wouldn't agree with or condone. So yeah, as soon as people hear about this, they're like, if I get a lot of messages, I should be suspicious. One of the spear phishing is called, that I myself have experienced, and I know better, so I didn't fall for this. My CEO was in a conference in a different country, and I get an email early in the morning from supposedly my CEO. Hey, I need help. I want to buy something and my credit card has been canceled. Can you please use your credit card, buy it? I promise you I'll reimburse you. And this email looks suspicious because, he's the CEO. He has his own credit card, even if he can't use the company's. Why would he be calling on me? And looking at it closely, I see that the email is not my CEO's email. It's just a random email. They just changed the name to look like my CEO, and they must have seen from his LinkedIn that he's elsewhere, so they know I can't contact him because of the hour difference. So they use his name, supposed email, and contact me. Obviously, I informed the company and realized that on the same day, probably the same guys have used the same trick on 5 or 10 different people in the company, the exact same email. And they're like, please help, it's important, it's for the company, don't tell anybody, I want it to be a surprise.
Yeah.
There are all these kinds of human engineering sort of tricks that once they're known, once you tell people about this, they're like, it's obvious. If I get an email like this, I'll be suspicious, I'll know what to look for. But until you do, you might easily fall for this. It's early in the morning, you're still groggy, you just woke up, your CEO is in a conference. It might be important. Your first instinct is, if you care about the company, let's help them out. It might, it'll benefit the company. I'll be praised. I'm helping. And you're just, in this case, I would just be giving my credit card information. It could have been something else. It could have been, please send me, I don't know, our list of clients. Please send me to this email an unlocked version of our source code. I don't know, something like this, because I want to show an investor. Whatever, it could be anything. If you fall for this, you've just put your whole company at risk. And this is exactly the type of stories that need to be out there, that people need to know about. And if you keep it quiet because you're embarrassed, because you want to keep your profits, because it doesn't matter if the information leaked, as long as nobody knows about it, you're fine. It's good in the short term. Everything comes out in the long run. You'll just look worse.
Yeah, probably. I know that, from a moral perspective, I totally understand. And I also think everybody should share their thing. I'm just, from a realistic standpoint, I can see how people not share it. Don't want to look bad. So maybe it would be cool
True.
if you could do that anonymously. Would that be an
You could.
option?
You
Yeah.
could. You could, yes. You
Yeah.
could inform them anonymously, because getting the information is better than not getting it at all.
Yeah.
They do
Exactly.
accept anonymous, tips, and they keep
Yes.
updating their vulnerability database. They keep updating their exploit database. They have a web page, CISA. They have a web page full of tools that you can use to help secure your software. They're trying to be as helpful as possible. It's their job not just to secure the government's framework or network,
Yeah.
to secure the nation's,
And probably it's
software.
also a trust issue, right? I mean, I'm in Europe,
Definitely.
so if you tell me about all these organizations, I'm like a little bit, I'm like, can I trust them? Maybe the US, people are a little bit more, have a bigger trust
Nope.
in no? Okay.
Nope.
So I'm not alone,
That
because I'm
trust.
like, I'm
No.
getting a little bit stressed out if you tell me to
Yeah.
tell somebody that I don't know and they seem like so big, important, like intimidating. So I think
Yeah.
that I definitely would, I recall that you should do that. And I probably will do it. I will do it. But it's not an easy call for me,
No,
like if
it's
I
not.
would mess up, it's definitely not something that I think, oh yeah, I'm going to tell them. It would probably take a lot of courage for me to think,
Yeah.
let's do the right thing. Right. And I'm
Big
saying to
brother.
everybody,
Yeah.
do it,
Big
do
brother
it.
is always
But
Big brother is always watching. Is a concern for everybody, especially in your cybersecurity, which is exactly why the whole philosophy of shifting left exists in the first
mhm,
place. The whole philosophy of zero trust. Don't trust people, so you don't end up having to call people you
yeah.
don't want to for help. And that circles us back to where we started. Having more visibility into whatever it is you're doing, having more trust in whatever it is
Hmm.
you're using, should help. It won't eliminate the risk, but it should help minimize it to a point where the cases where you will need to call for help are smaller and further,
Yeah.
further between. Again, using an SBOM will give you more visibility into what you're using. Asking for SBOMs from your third-party suppliers would, again, increase the visibility. And there are multiple other tools which you could employ, like integrity verification reports, digital signing, to make sure that whatever it is you're using originated from the person that you're taking it from. Lots of
Yeah.
different types of tools that can be employed to make sure that eventually what you're using, you have greater visibility and greater trust into the components.
Yeah. So
And that should be, yeah.
what's your take on all these automatic scanning tools, right? Like I have
Mhm.
static analysis that tells me, I've run that on all my repositories, that tells me if I'm using an unsecure version of some software. Obviously, probably there are some boundaries to, how much that can help me, but maybe it helps me more than having an SBOM that I have to manually look for. I don't know, like,
You don't have to manually look for an SBOM. That's the beauty of the thing. The whole idea of using an SBOM is that it's standard. There are standards for creating it, several right now, but they're all still standard. And once you have a standard type of file, essentially a JSON, with a standard
yeah,
structure, you can use automatic tools to scan it. There are already automated open source tools for taking an SBOM and telling you what vulnerabilities are in it. Because again, it's a list. It's easy to scan a list and compare it to a database of vulnerabilities. So you don't have to manually look at it if you don't want to. And second of
so
all,
is it
yes,
already used? Is that SBOM?
yeah,
Maybe that's my
it
tools are
is.
already using it.
Yeah, unless they tell you they might and they might not. SBOM is relatively new, and there's a big push to get
Hmm.
it to more and more, to be more and more in circulation and in use. The key here is to get people to ask for it. You want your DevOps who work on the pipeline to make sure that no breaches happen in the middle of the pipeline, at the end of it, and you want that when you end up delivering that software, either via a website, a server, a cloud service, or just putting an image on a repository, you want to make sure that whatever it is you got there is exactly what you intended it to be, that nobody swapped it or changed it or modified it unintentionally or with intention, usually a bad one. The more of these steps and protections you take, the better you are. Obviously, if you can show them to people, if you can say, yes, I'm secure, here's a document that shows all the tests and they're signed, here's an SBOM with my final product, and it is signed as well, so you can verify that I am the one who produced this SBOM and nobody else did, so that you know that it wasn't modified. Again, the whole thing is there to give the people who are going to use that image the security that it is legit, that it is fine. And that is exactly the type of confidence, of security, of trust that is the one you mentioned is missing. Because right now, there's not a lot of automatic trust anywhere, especially the way the world is today.
Yeah. You just created 4 new positions at every company. Every small company. No, yeah, I totally agree. My whole point maybe for the whole thing is it seems very overwhelming, right? And as an expert, you know that we are far from what you are describing. So what are the first steps that I can do? Like, say I'm this startup, we have a couple of people, we are, still thinking about,
Yeah.
can we even add that one more position? So what's the
You
first
don't
thing that
even
we
have
should
to add
do?
any positions. You don't even have to
Yeah.
add any positions, because just like anything else, a lot of the tools that I described, you can get a proprietary version, obviously, but open source is there for the rescue. There are open source tools for generating SBOMs. There are open source tools for scanning SBOMs for vulnerabilities. Those are the two, from my perspective, two of the things that you can implement in your pipeline immediately, even if you're a single developer, even if you're just building a POC in your mom's garage or basement. Why not use them? It's fun to play with these things just to see the usability. And I'm pretty sure that once you input an SBOM, any SBOM, even if it's not yours, if you input an SBOM into the tool and check out the list of vulnerabilities, you're like, this is really useful. I should employ that in my own pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. So I will definitely try that out. I can see the usefulness. So yeah, thank you so much for explaining everything to us today. And I will link the tools that you just mentioned, not by name, but that one that you have in mind. So I will link them in the show notes, and so everybody can try them out. Yeah. Thank you so much, Barak, for
You're
being
very
on my
welcome.
show today. Yeah.
Very welcome.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye. This was another episode of the Software Engineering Unlocked podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please help me spread the word about the podcast. Send the episode to a friend via email, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever messaging system you use, or give it a positive review on your favorite podcasting platform such as Spotify or iTunes. This would mean really a lot to me. So thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.